Characters are what they do, not who they were.
Should screenwriters write character profiles or biographies?
So in my opinion, writers can do whatever they like. If that's helpful for them, go for it. I don't do them. I don't do them. I don't like them. I don't have any of my writers do them. I am not aware of all my professional screenwriters who are clients, I'm not aware of one of them that does that. I have a client who has his movies everyone here has heard of, and he does biopics, and his philosophy is he writes the story first and then he does the research. He doesn't even want to be distracted by extraneous details about someone's life. But, he basically goes with like a nutshell idea of what this person's life represented to him. When he heard about this person's life, like what got him excited, what sounds like the story of their life, because a life is not inherently a story, so what was the story in there that got him excited? Basically sort of a Wikipedia level of understanding, and then get away from the facts, write the story, write the emotional part of what, fascinated him about this character. And then he does research to fill in the details, right? He doesn't even want to be distracted. And I absolutely know writers who have done too much research, that it gets in the way of you being able to tell a story if you know too much. So I don't like them. To me, characters are what they do, not who they were. So for me, 90% of character development is going to be in my nutshell technique method, right? It is, who is this character? What does this person want? What is this person's flaw? And now I'm going to figure out what would be the journey to best test these elements. To me, character development and plot are not two different things. They're intrinsically related. They're intrinsically tied together. So that's why I find character profiles kind of frustrating, because we're talking an abstract idea about what this person's favorite color is. I've seen these lists that my students have told me of I had 120 questions I had to answer, from a previous professor who said, I need to know what kind of car they drive and, all these things. Those are just abstract kind of making stuff up, right? As opposed to, let's see the character in action, and then that's going to help define who they are. So they have a want, they have multiple wants, they have flaws. So then I want to design what is the best journey to bring out and test this character. So I'm going to have a big event happen at the 25% mark. I call the point of no return, and that's not an arbitrary event. It is an event I've specifically designed to test this character, right? Another character wouldn't work. I want it to be, my journey to be unique to this character. This journey is uniquely testing this character. Another person might not react to that point of no return. It might not be a big deal. I'm going to pick one that is a big deal to the character, and how they react to it, that reveals character. Like we say in life, you can tell someone's true character in a crisis. It's the same thing. We can tell a character's true nature by what they do in the face of obstacles. And so the nutshell is a big part of that. We're going to, what choices are they going to make? And the choices they make are telling us who that character is and who they are becoming. And beyond that, I really recommend writers brainstorm an obstacle list. And so what I love about an obstacle list is it's not a commitment. You're not committing to anything. You can make up anything you want. It's just a list separate of everything else. And you take a shower, you think of a couple new obstacles, get out, add it to your list. Just keep adding obstacles to your list. And then when we get to Act 2 and we don't have maybe as much structure, and you're running out of ways to test our character, let's look over to the obstacle list. Let's put this obstacle here, see what happens. So how they react to the obstacle reveals their character to me. And then beyond that, I think of the rest of character development. I like to think of it as spackle. It's like you don't want a lot of spackle because that, everything's going to collapse. Just the tiniest amount of spackle I can get away with to fill in the cracks. So once I start writing and my character's dealing with her coworkers in her office in New York, I'm going to have to make some choices beyond what I've already established in the nutshell, which again is 95% of the character development. But I'm going to have to make some other choices. Like, is she a native New Yorker, or did she move here from across the country or the suburbs? I mean, that might affect how she talks and how she relates to her coworkers. And so maybe I'll decide off the cuff, I think she's from Connecticut. She's from Connecticut, maybe upper middle class. That's going to affect why she's a little condescending to some of her New York native coworkers, right? Little choices like that. It's probably not even going to come out, right? But if you were to ask me, well, where's your protagonist from? If I made up, if I answered Chicago and I said it in such a way you were convinced that I knew that, then I've done my job, even though I made that up on the top of my head. But I made it up on the basis of these other things I know about her. I'm just adding this little bit of spackle. I want maybe someone who's from Chicago, right? So just a little bit here and there. I don't want to overload it. Because again, characters are not their backstory. They're who they are in the present. And we see it by what they do in the present. And there are a couple of dangers. I tell my writers, some people really like them and are attached to them, and I say, go ahead, use them. I'm not saying you can't use them. I'm just saying you don't have to use them with me. But I do want you to be aware of some of the dangers of them. And if any of these happening, maybe you need to reconsider using character profiles. That people start getting locked into the way that they think the story needs to go based on these preconceived ideas about who the character is, even though they just made up an arbitrary character profile, right? But they've gotten attached to, no, she's from Iowa, she did this, and all of a sudden that makes your story inflexible, even though these little biographical facts aren't adding anything. You're attached to it because you have this idea that that's who the character is, even though those things aren't important. There's the danger of exposition, that you feel like you have to tell us all these things you figured out. You're going to have to drop in, these little things that you've created as far as the character profile. And then the last problem is, and probably the worst one, is procrastination. I see that, and I see this particularly with people writing biopics, where they say, I'm not ready to write the story enough yet because I haven't done enough research. And my response is almost always, you have done too much research. You need to stop doing research. You're never going to write the story. The more you research, the more you're going to find out things that are going to confuse you and contradict it. And instead of looking at, we're not writing a book report here of this person's life. It's a story, right? You need to look big picture. What was important about their story, and stop getting distracted by little details. When it comes to research, I like to say Wikipedia and be done, right? That's it. You just need a snapshot of who that person is. Now what got you excited when you read that Wikipedia page? What got your mind working? Write a story around that. Let me give you, if I may, an example of a character profile, okay? All right, so this is a man, he's an Italian man. He's good looking, he's tall, he's handsome, but he's a little shy. Nothing was ever good enough for his mother when he was growing up. And when he was in school, he partied a little too much, and after school, the one job he could get was working on a boat. And so he stayed with that and ended up working his way up the ranks in that world. And now, at this point in his life, he's married. He has two little girls he absolutely dotes on. He adores his girls. On Sunday, the whole family, they go to church, And when he comes home, he likes to listen to the opera when it comes on the radio. Not because he has any deep understanding about opera, because he doesn't. It's his mother used to listen to the opera when it comes on the radio, and he turns it on, even though it kind of makes him sad sometimes. There's this thing, he almost can't stop himself from this habit of, you listen to the opera on Sunday afternoons. So one day, he found out that the cruise ship, he's now a captain of this enormous cruise liner, and that they're going to be going near his old hometown. And so he decides he wants to show off for his old high school buddies and show them this big, enormous cruise liner that he's the captain of. And so he decides to steer the boat too close to the shore, and it goes aground and it starts to sink. And he panics, absolutely panics. He's one of the first people, one of the only people in the lifeboat. Like, he literally pushes women and children aside to get on the lifeboat. And from the lifeboat, he calls it into the Italian Coast Guard from his cell phone. And once the Italian Coast Guard figures out it's the captain calling from a lifeboat before anybody has been evacuated, they order him back on the boat to oversee the evacuation, which he refuses to do. So that was the true story of the Italian sea captain back in 2012, who ran his ship aground, and 32 people ended up dying and because of his negligence, and he ended up going to prison for manslaughter for that. Now, of the biography I gave you, what of that had any influence to you for the story I was telling you about the sea captain whose ship ran aground?
Well, I guess I saw that he had insecurities, and then that really fueled him, and he was kind of trapped. You said he was shy, but there was a part of him that kind of wanted to have this like peacock plumage and show off, and that cost him because of the accident. That was basically his plumage, trying to sort of spread his feathers, and he made a bad mistake, and he kind of showed who his character was by not helping the others on the, as the captain, he should eat last, he should be off the boat last, things like that. And he didn't, he showed that he put himself first.
And what about any of the other stuff I told you about his childhood or his family? Did that have any bearing for you?
Yeah, it did. It showed me that he was a caring man, sensitive, cared for his family. You said you had 2 daughters that he doted on. But I think he was still stuck, as all of us are, in his childhood, because he would listen to this opera, even though it didn't really make him happy. I think he was trying to get maybe a validation he never got. Mm-hmm. And that drove him, mm-hmm. as it does most of us. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it drove him to a point that was very costly and cost innocent people their lives.
Well, for me, pretty much none of that profile had any bearing on the story. To me, the story is about a man who's so cowardly, right, who makes such a brash move. And by the way, the only part I didn't make up about him was that he did make the choice to steer the boat close to shore to show off for friends. That part was a true part of the story. But beyond that, the rest of his backstory, we could pick elements that might highlight things or bring things out more, but they really didn't have any bearing on the story or even who he was. Like the fact that, this is basically, it's a man who is shallow enough that he thinks that it's worthwhile to show off for some high school buddies, even though that's putting people's lives at risk, and that he's a coward. That he's an absolute coward, right? When the crisis came, he was the most cowardly person on the scene, so much so he wouldn't get back on the ship to oversee things. That just outweighs the whole biography that I dreamt up about him. We can pick some things that can, help emphasize that, but the real story is about a coward, not about someone who had a childhood with a difficult parent, And so I really like to focus on what is happening. What are they doing in the now? And then we might pick elements that help emphasize, further enforce certain ideas about them, or sometimes specific backstory, a specific incident that makes someone behave a certain way. But in the case of the Italian sea captain, when I read that story in the paper, I didn't have any interest in who he was, what his backstory was. I was just fascinated by someone who would make such a stupid decision as to show off for a bunch of friends and then be a coward in the face of the problems he caused and caused so many people's deaths.
Right. Yeah, that's a very tragic story. One last thing, if I may. So, in another reason, maybe that writing a long bio, you talked about maybe people in other classes finding out what's the character's favorite color, what car do they drive. Is it because the writer's becoming too attached to that character and now they can't allow bad things to happen and not be biased toward them?
It's not so much that they can't allow bad things to happen, but they become so attached to these preconceived and arbitrary ideas about who they are that they even before they figured out the story, they're saying, yeah, but this character wouldn't do that. And I question, well, why wouldn't they do that? If that's going to be the most interesting. Let's say I started with just the bio of the Italian sea captain, and then had him, do the ship go aground and become a coward. Maybe I would have been let's say it's not a real life story, that it was, that I'm not basing it on anything, but I start with this profile, and then I say, but would he really do that? I mean, he is caring for his daughters, and that makes him not a coward. It could get people thinking the wrong way, versus let's get to the story. The story is a coward, someone who behaves in a cowardly way and is going to have to live with the repercussions of that. How do they live with that? So I'm just concerned with the 120 questions. They're going to get so distracted by this invention they have made that they won't find their way into the story. They'll be inflexible.
And two, people are situational. They can be wonderful with one group of people, but then they can be absolutely cutthroat and despicable with others. And they sort of have these situational ethics. So it's, if we get too locked into, well, this is a good person, they would never do that. We've seen 100,000 stories of what people might be pillars in their society or in their little area, but then they do despicable things behind the scenes.
Yeah, it can be, and I think it can be an even better tool using a little character profile stuff for adding irony. Like if the person had been, the Italian sea captain had been one way, and now is, had just lectured his little girls about the importance of standing up for yourself and bravery, and then they behave like a coward, right? Those can be interesting little choices to add things like that. But ultimately, who this man is, his character is somebody who's a coward, right? And it took this incident to bring it out. And that's the important part of the story to me.